Cluny's army halted at the sound of the Joseph bell. As the dust settled, Fangburn looked to his leader for approval. "They're ringing that big bell again, Chief. Maybe they'll think it'll frighten us off." The warlord's eye rested balefully on his scout. "Shut your mouth, fool. If you'd done as I ordered and come right back to report, the way Cheese Thief did, we might have been inside that abbey by now." Fangburn slunk back into the ranks. He hoped Cluny had forgotten, but Cluny rarely forgot anything on a campaign. The element of surprise had been lost. Now he must try another ploy, show of force. The mere sight of a fully armed horde had worked before, and he had little doubt it would prove effective now. Ordinary, peaceful creatures were usually panic-stricken at the sight of Cluny the Scourge at the head of his army. The rat was a cunning general, except the times when his mad rage took control of him. But what need of berserk fits for a bunch of silly mice? Cluny knew the value of fear as a weapon, and Cluny was a fearsome figure. His long, ragged black cloak was made of bat wings, fastened at the throat with a mole skull. The immense war helmet he wore had the plumes of a blackbird and the horns of a stag beetle adorning it. From beneath the slanted visor, his one eye glared viciously out at the abbey before him. Matthias's voice rang out sharp and clear from the high parapet. "Halt! Who goes there?" Redtooth swaggered forward and took up the challenge in his chief's name, as he called back up at the walls. "Look well, all creatures. This is the mighty horde of Cluny the Scourge. My name is Redtooth. I speak for Cluny, our leader." Constance's reply was harsh and unafraid. "Then speak your piece and be gone, rats." Silence hung upon the air, while Redtooth and Cluny held a whispered conference. Redtooth returned to the walls. "Cluny the Scourge says he will not deal with badgers. He will only speak with the leaders of the mice. Let us in, so that my chief may sit and talk to your chief." Redtooth dodged back as his request was greeted by howls of derision and some loose pieces of masonry from the ramparts. These plump little mice were not as peaceful as they had first looked. The rats looked to Cluny, but he was eyeing the abbot who had joined Constance and Matthias. They appeared to be consulting quietly. Cluny watched tensely. There seemed to be some disagreement between the old mouse and his two advisers. They conferred a while, then Matthias came forward to the parapet. He pointed at Cluny and Redtooth with his staff. "You there, and you also. My abbot will speak with you both. The rest must remain outside." A rumble of protest from the horde was silenced by a crack from Cluny's tail. He lifted his visor. "We agree, Mouse. Let us in." "What about the hostages for safe conduct?" hissed Redtooth. Cluny spat contemptuously. "Don't talk a fool's talk. Do you imagine a load of mice in funny robes could take me captive?" Redtooth gnawed anxiously on a split claw. "Maybe not, Chief, but have you cast a weathered eye over that badger?" Cluny answered quietly out of the side of his mouth. "Don't worry. I've been watching her. A real big country bumpkin. No, these are mice of honor. They'd sooner die than break their word to anyone. You leave this to me." As Cluny and Redtooth made for the gatehouse door, Constance shouted, "Put down your weapons, rats! Throw off your armor to show us that you come in peace." Redtooth spluttered angrily. "Hell's teeth! Who does that one think she's ordering around?" Cluny shot him a warning glance. "Quiet. Do as she says." Both rats took off their armor and placed it in a pile on the road. Matthias cried down to Cluny, "If you really are Cluny the Scourge, then we know of your tale. It is a weapon. Therefore you will knot it tightly around your waist so that it cannot be used." Cluny laughed mirthlessly. He squinted at Matthias and cracked his tail dramatically. "Young mouse," he called, "you do right to ask this thing, for surely you are looking at Cluny the Scourge." Having said this, he took his tail in his claws and pulled the poisoned war spike from its tip. Tossing it on the armor pile, Cluny hitched his tail in a knot around his middle. "Now will you let us in, mice? You can see we are unarmed." Ponderously, the heavy gate inched open. The two rats passed through a bristling forest of staves. The gate slammed shut behind them. Cluny mentally estimated the walls to be of immense thickness as he and Redtooth, ducking their heads, emerged from the tunnel-like arch into the Abbey grounds, where Constance and Matthias were waiting in the sunlight. The defenders followed the two rats closely, menacing them with staves. Matthias rapped out a curt command. "Leave us, mice! Go back to your duties on the wall." Unhappy at leaving the abbot unguarded, the mice hesitated to obey the order to withdraw. Cluny addressed Matthias scornfully. "Here, mouse, watch me shift 'em." Suddenly he whirled upon the apprehensive creatures. A single eye rolled madly in its socket as Cluny bared claws and fangs, snarling, "Ha ha! I've got a powerful hunger for mice. You'd best get aloft on those walls. Ha ha!" Cluny leaped into the air. The mice scattered in panic. Constance stopping the proceedings with a loud, angry bark. "Here now, enough of that rat. You are here to talk with the abbot. Get along with you." Matthias was glad he was walking behind the rats. He blushed with shame. Cluny had sent the defenders scattering like butterflies in a whirlwind. Matthias was furious. The enemy now knew he was dealing with untrained and untested soldiers. As the party walked towards the cavern hole, Cluny could sense hostility emanating from the young mouse, who flip-flopped behind him in over-large sandals. Strange for one so young to be counted as a captain, he thought. Moreover, the little fellow didn't seem to fear him. But enough of that. Cluny would deal with him when the time came. Meanwhile, the big rat gazed about his surroundings in secret admiration. What an astounding place! He allowed himself a peek at the future. One day this would be called Cluny's castle. He liked the sound of that. Secure from attack, living off the fat of the land, in his mind's eye he saw it all. Those mice and the woodland creatures enslaved, living just to serve him. He would hold a sway as far as the eye could see, power, an end to his rovings, a dream come true. King Cluny. Entering the abbey, the party stopped to make way for a pretty little field mouse bearing a tray. "Oh, Matthias, I've brought some refreshments for you and—" "Thank you, Cornflower. Put them down on the table," said Matthias abruptly. Redtooth nudged Cluny. "Cornflower, eh? Satan's nose. She's a pretty little one for you." Cluny remained silent. He stood insolently watching Cornflower set the table in cavern hole. A pretty one indeed. The abbot indicated chairs. They all sat except Cluny, who lounged against the table, using the chair as a footstool. He glared at Redtooth until he stood and waited alongside his chief. Idly, Cluny picked up a bowl of honeyed milk and sampled it. Slop! Spat it on the floor. The abbot folded his paws into the wide sleeves of his habit and stared impassively at the warlord. "What do you want at Redwall Abbey, my son?" Cluny kicked the chair over and laughed madly. As the echoes died around the room, his face went grim. "Your son? Ha! That's a good one. I'll tell you what I want, mouse. I want it all. The lot. Everything. Do you hear me?" Matthias's chair clattered on its side as he sprang forward, breaking free from the restraining paws of the abbot. "Listen, rat, you don't scare me. I'll give you our answer. You get nothing. Now do you understand that?" Shaking with fury, Matthias allowed himself to be pulled back onto the chair. The abbot turned to Cluny. "You must forgive Matthias. He is young and headstrong. Now, as to your proposal, I am afraid it is out of the question. Should you or your army require medical attention, food, clothing, or help upon your way, you will find us only too willing to assist." Cluny interrupted rudely by pounding upon the table until the abbot was silenced. He pointed a claw at Redtooth. "Read them the articles." Redtooth held up a tattered parchment. He cleared his throat. "These are the articles of surrender to be obeyed by all creatures who come under the claw of Cluny the Scourge or any of his commanders. 1. Surrender will be total and unconditional. 2. Cluny will execute the leaders of all who choose to oppose him. 3. All property conquered will belong solely to Cluny the Scourge. This includes homes, food, crops, land, and additionally all creatures dwelling on said property. They shall be owned by Cluny." Thwack! Redtooth got no further. Unable to contain himself, Matthias set his staff ripping through the middle of the articles. As a torn document fluttered to the floor, Redtooth launched himself at Matthias with a snarl. The rat was actually in mid-air when a huge, blunt paw knocked him flat. He lay stunned, with Constance standing over him. "Why pick on a small mouse? Surely a big, strong rat like you can deal with an old badger. Come on, try me for size." It was only the timely intervention of Abbot Mortimer that saved Redtooth's life. "Constance, would you please let the rat up? Much as I would like to see him get his just deserts, you must remember we cannot break the law of hospitality in our abbey." Redtooth staggered shakily to his feet, backing warily away from the badger. Cluny spoke as if nothing had occurred. "You, Abbot Mouse, you have until tomorrow evening to give me your answer." Not normally given to anger, the abbot stared Cluny in the eye, his face a mask of cold fury. "I will not need until tomorrow, rat. You can have my answer now. How dare you come here with your robber band to read articles of death and slavery to me? I tell you that neither you nor your army will ever set paw or claw inside Redwall, not while I or any of my creatures have breath in our bodies to fight and resist you. That is my solemn word." Cluny sneered and turned on his heel. Followed by Redtooth, he stamped out. On the stairs between Cavern Hole and Great Hall, he stopped and turned, his cold voice echoing between chambers. "Then die, all of you, every male, female, and young one. You have refused my terms. Now you will suffer the punishment of Cluny. You will beg on your knees for death to come swiftly, but I shall make your torment loud and long before you die." It was then that Constance did something that creatures would speak of in years to come. Exerting the full strength of a female badger, she lifted the massive Cavern Hole dining table. It was a huge, solid oaken thing that no dozen mice could even move. Dishes clattered and food spilled as Constance heaved the table above her head. Her voice was a roar. "Get out, rats! Leave this abbey! I'm weary of your voices. Hurry before I break the laws of hospitality and ask the abbot's pardon later. Go while you still have skulls." With the best grace he could muster, Cluny walked rather quickly up the stairs, followed by Redtooth, who laughed nervously. "Big country bumpkin, chief? One more word from you back there, and she'd have thrown that table and crushed us." Remembering who it was he had spoken to in this insolent fashion, Redtooth cringed, expecting Cluny to deal him a blow for impudence, but nothing happened. Cluny was standing transfixed. Oblivious to all about him, even Matthias and the abbot who had followed him out, Cluny stood staring at the tapestry. "Who is that mouse?" he gasped. Matthias followed the direction of the rat's gaze. He walked to the tapestry with his paw outstretched. "Do you mean this mouse?" Cluny nodded dumbly. Matthias, still with his paw outstretched, declared proudly, "This is Martin the warrior. He founded our order, and I'll tell you something else, rat. Martin was the bravest mouse that ever lived. If he were here today, he'd just take up his big sword and send you and all your bullies packing. Those of you he didn't chop up into crow meat." Much to everyone's surprise, Cluny allowed himself to be shown out. He was like one in a daze all the way back to the gatehouse. A hush fell over the mice on guard as Cluny and Redtooth were let out onto the road. Swiftly the horde gathered around the warlord and his lieutenant. They awaited orders. Deputizing for Cluny, Redtooth called out, "Form up! Back to the church, everyone!" Cluny marched automatically, shaking his head in disbelief. Martin the warrior, the mouse who pursued him through his nightmares. What did it mean? As Redtooth marched away, a voice hailed him from the wall. He turned and looked upwards. The torn articles, the parchment wrapped around a fistful of rotting vegetables, splattered in his face. Livid with rage, he clawed the foul mess from his eyes and saw Constance leaning over the parapet with a wicked grin of delight on her striped muzzle. The badger shouted mockingly, "Don't forget to call again, Rat. I'll be delighted to see you. We've got some unfinished business that I'm looking forward to settling. Just you and me, Redtooth." Before the rat could reply, she had vanished from sight.